It was a cold February evening in 2004 when 21-year-old Maura Murray, a nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, embarked on what she thought would be an ordinary weekend trip. But what unfolded over the next hours has left a trail of questions that continues to baffle authorities, amateur sleuths, and anyone who has followed her story. Maura was described by friends as independent, intelligent, and adventurous. She had a bright future ahead, with a scholarship, a nursing career on the horizon, and a love of the outdoors. To those who knew her, she was confident and responsible. Yet in the days leading up to her disappearance, subtle signs suggested that something in her life was quietly unraveling. The week before February 9th seemed ordinary at first glance, but closer look revealed odd behavior. Maura made unusual phone calls to her professors, her bank, and even to family members. Some of the calls were cryptic. She left messages that were incomplete or vague. Her bank records show she withdrew a significant amount of cash, something she had rarely done. Her dorm mates noticed she was quieter than usual, occasionally distant. She packed a bag and left her dorm room without informing anyone where she was going. It was a behavior that many would consider out of character. But in isolation, none of these actions seemed alarming enough to prompt serious concern. On the morning of February 9th, Maura's friend saw her leaving campus, dressed for travel. She stopped by her boyfriend's dorm to pick up some belongings. She was calm, collected, but a lingering sense of unease seemed to hang around her actions, subtle yet undeniable in hindsight. Maura headed toward New Hampshire on Route 112, a rural stretch of road known for its winding paths and dense forests. That night, snow was falling lightly and the roads were slick. Somewhere along the way, Maura's car went off the road and became stuck in a snowbank. Witnesses reported seeing a young woman near the vehicle. Some claimed she appeared to be talking to someone inside a truck. Others described her walking along the side of the road, seemingly trying to get help. Yet the details were inconsistent. Some thought she was composed. Others thought she seemed disoriented. What is certain is that the car was abandoned, with hazard lights blinking, personal belongings missing, and no signs of struggle. Authorities quickly arrived at the scene, combing the surrounding woods and nearby areas. Volunteers joined in the search, often braving freezing temperatures and treacherous conditions. They checked rivers, abandoned cabins, and trails, but no trace of Maura was found. Dogs trained to detect human scent were brought in, but even they failed to pick up a definitive trail. Investigators questioned neighbors, commuters, and anyone who might have crossed her path. Yet the more they looked, the more perplexing the case became. There were no witnesses to an abduction, no evidence of foul play, and no personal effects that could explain her next steps. Speculation about Maura's fate grew rapidly. Some believed she staged her own disappearance. Perhaps she had grown weary of her current life and decided to start anew, leaving behind her past and the people she knew. This theory is supported by her sudden cash withdrawal and secretive packing, though skeptics argue it fails to explain her sudden departure into near-freezing temperatures without proper gear. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Maura Murray made a series of decisions that continue to raise questions among investigators and researchers. One of the most notable was her withdrawal of nearly $280 in cash, the majority of her available funds. This transaction, made shortly before she left the University of Massachusetts Amherst campus, has often been interpreted as a potential indication of intent. Some analysts suggest it points to premeditation, perhaps signaling that Maura planned a brief or extended absence from her known environment. Others note that the amount, while not substantial, could have been meant to sustain her for only a few days, consistent with a short-term trip rather than a permanent departure. There is also the possibility that the withdrawal had no deeper significance beyond immediate necessity. However, in the absence of confirmed sightings or evidence of further financial activity, this single act remains one of the most concrete pieces of data in a case otherwise defined by ambiguity. Others suggest she may have fallen victim to a crime of opportunity. The area she disappeared in was rural and isolated, perfect conditions for someone with malicious intent to take advantage. Some reports hinted at suspicious vehicles in the area that night, though none could be conclusively tied to her disappearance. Another possibility is that Maura succumbed to environmental hazards. With snow-covered roads and freezing temperatures, it is conceivable she wandered into the woods, got lost, and eventually succumbed to exposure. Yet despite extensive searches, not a single trace of her body or clothing was ever found, casting doubt on this theory. Over time, Maura's story captured the attention of the media and the internet. Online forums dedicated to amateur sleuths dissected every available detail, from her social media posts to her last known movements. People analyzed her phone records, bank statements, and even patterns in her writing. Dozens of reported sightings emerged, most of them unverified, adding layers of intrigue and mystery. Documentaries and podcasts have revisited the case repeatedly, exploring new angles and interviewing family members, friends, and experts. Each revisit seems to generate as many questions as answers, perpetuating a cycle of fascination and speculation. Perhaps what makes Maura's disappearance so haunting is a human element. Her family continues to live with uncertainty, never knowing whether she is alive or gone. Friends remember her fondly, grappling with the tension between hope and despair. And for the public, her story serves as an example of how quickly life can veer off course and leave questions unanswered. Christmas Eve, 1945, Fayetteville, West Virginia. It was a night meant for family, celebration, and joy. The Sodder family had gathered in their home, anticipating a quiet holiday. Yet what began as a seemingly ordinary evening turned into a nightmare that has haunted generations. By the morning of December 25th, 5 of the 10 Sodder children had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only charred remains of their home and a community engulfed in shock and disbelief. The Sodder children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, ranged in age from 5 to 14. They were lively, playful, and deeply loved by their parents, George and Jenny Sodder. For years, the family had maintained a modest but happy life, and the children's laughter had been a constant in their household. But all of that would change in one terrifying night of fire, smoke, and uncertainty. It began as any ordinary Christmas Eve might. The family finished decorating the tree, put up stockings, and prepared for a night of festive anticipation. At some point in the evening, George Sodder, the father, went outside to check on a generator or perform some routine task. In the hours that followed, a fire broke out in the home. By the time neighbors noticed the flames, the house was already engulfed in fire. George and Jenny tried desperately to save their children, but the fire spread too quickly. By morning, the house was reduced to ashes. Yet something was profoundly strange. While the structure was devastated, investigators found no remains of the 5 missing children. Certain objects, furniture, silverware, even a few toys, were found intact or only partially damaged, leading to unsettling questions. How could the children disappear completely while other objects survived the blaze? Authorities initially treated the event as a tragic house fire, but skepticism quickly arose. George Sodder himself suspected foul play, noting unusual circumstances around the fire. The phone lines were mysteriously cut that night, preventing neighbors from calling for help. The ladder in the home was removed before the fire department arrived, making escape more difficult. These anomalies fueled suspicions that the fire was not accidental. Police scoured the ashes, searching for remains or clues. The lack of bodies baffled investigators. Traditional forensic methods of the time were limited, and the fire had destroyed much of what might have been useful evidence. Yet for the Sodders, the question that burned most fiercely was not about the fire. It was about the children. In the days following the fire, the family received strange phone calls. The voices on the other end were vague, sometimes cryptic, and often suggested knowledge of the children's disappearance. Some calls were traced in numbers that could not be verified, while others seemed deliberately designed to confuse or mislead. Sightings of the children were reported in nearby towns and even across state lines. People claimed to have seen children matching their descriptions, sometimes appearing alone, sometimes in the company of strangers. Yet none of these reports could be confirmed, leaving the family with a harrowing mixture of hope and despair. Years later, letters allegedly from the missing children surfaced, postmarked from distant cities. The letters spoke of adaptation, schooling, and longing for family. While intriguing, none were definitively verified, and each new lead seemed to dissolve into uncertainty. Over the decades, numerous theories emerged to explain what happened that night. Some believe the children were taken intentionally, perhaps by someone with a grudge against the family or by criminals seeking ransom. George Sodder himself suspected enemies he had made in his business dealings. Others argue the fire may have been set deliberately to cover up a kidnapping or other crime. The cutting of the phone lines and removal of the latter suggests preparation rather than accident. Another theory posits that the children perished in the fire, but that the body remains were somehow removed or destroyed. While grim, this explanation fails to fully account for the lack of physical evidence. Each theory has its advocates, and each has its skeptics. The mystery deepens because, even with modern technology, no verifiable trace of Sodder children has ever been found. In May 2008, in the quiet town of Marshall, Minnesota, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson went for a late-night drive that would end in a mystery still unsolved today. Brandon, a thoughtful and independent young man, was known for his love of adventure, often exploring the countryside and taking solo drives through rural roads. On the night of May 14th, a simple misadventure spiraled into one of the most perplexing disappearances in modern American history. Unlike other cold cases, Brandon's disappearance unfolded in a matter of hours, and every detail, from his final phone call to the landscape around him, has been scrutinized without yielding answers. Brandon was the youngest of 5 siblings, growing up in a close-knit family. Friends describe him as kind, intelligent, and cautious, but with a sense of adventure that sometimes bordered on recklessness. On the night of his disappearance, he had gone out to visit friends and then returned home late. During the drive, he took a turn that would change his life forever. It was a warm spring night, the roads quiet, and the stars bright overhead. Brandon was driving along rural highways, familiar with the area yet aware of the dangers that darkness and isolated roads bring. At some point, his car became stuck in a ditch along a gravel road near the Minnesota River. This seemingly minor accident would mark the beginning of an ordeal that would baffle investigators and haunt his family. Brandon immediately called his parents for assistance, maintaining a calm and composed tone at first. He explained that his car was stuck and that he would try to walk to the nearby town of Lind. During the conversation, Brandon described the terrain, the fields, and the roads he was navigating. Then came the final moments of the call. Brandon reported being near a ditch, seemingly disoriented. Suddenly, things took a dark turn. The line went dead. The abrupt ending left his parents terrified and confused. They attempted to call him back immediately, but the connection had been lost. By the time they organized a search, Brandon had vanished completely, leaving no evidence behind. The search for Brandon was swift and intense. Police, family, and volunteers combed the area on foot, in vehicles, and with the help of search dogs trained to detect human scent. Helicopters were deployed to scan the surrounding fields, rivers, and wooded areas. Yet despite these efforts, no trace of Brandon, no clothing, personal items, or footprints, was ever found. Investigators considered every possibility. Could Brandon have wandered into the river and drowned? Was he abducted? Did he stumble into an abandoned structure or hidden area where he became trapped? Every scenario had flaws, and no physical evidence supported any single conclusion. Brandon's disappearance sparked a wide array of theories. Some speculate that Brandon may have slipped into the nearby river or marshes and drowned. However, searches of the waterways turned up nothing. Another theory suggests that he became disoriented, wandered into the woods, and succumbed to exposure. Yet the area had been thoroughly searched, and no remains were ever found. Though less likely, the possibility of abduction cannot be ruled out. No witnesses saw anyone approach him, and there were no signs of struggle at the ditch. Some investigators speculated that someone may have been lying in wait, perhaps observing the roads, and took advantage of Brandon's vulnerable state. But again, there is no evidence to support this. The sudden disappearance, coupled with the eerie final phone call, has made Brandon's case one of the most confounding in modern cold case history. The area where Brandon disappeared is largely rural, with fields, small forests, and low-traffic roads. At night, it becomes isolated and difficult to navigate. The gravel roads are uneven, ditches line the sides, and the Minnesota River runs nearby. These conditions complicate searches and contribute to the plausibility of accidental disappearance scenarios. Yet, the complete absence of evidence is what makes this case particularly haunting. Search dogs, helicopters, volunteers all came up with no success. It is almost as if Brandon vanished into thin air. The Swanson family has endured immense hardship, living with the uncertainty of not knowing what happened to Brandon. Siblings and parents often revisited the roads, retracing his path, and constantly hoped for news or a clue. The ambiguity has been emotionally devastating, leaving a permanent void in their lives. For friends and neighbors, Brandon's disappearance became a source of tension and anxiety. The notion that someone could simply vanish without a trace challenges the sense of safety that rural communities often take for granted. Brandon's case attracted local, national, and even international attention. News reports highlighted the bizarre circumstances of the disappearance, while online forums dedicated to missing persons dissected every detail. Amateur sleuths analyzed maps, phone records, and environmental conditions, offering theories ranging from plausible to extraordinary. Podcasts and documentaries revisiting the case emphasize the eerie nature of the final phone call and the mystery of a complete disappearance in a relatively populated rural area. Each revisit sparked renewed interest, but never yielded answers. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson, along with those of Maura Murray and the Sodder Children, continues to stand as a subject of public fascination and unresolved inquiry. Each case highlights the limits of investigation, the passage of time, and the enduring determination of families seeking clarity in the face of uncertainty. Though the details differ, they all share a common thread: unanswered questions that live on despite years of speculation and search. These cases illustrate the complexity of human disappearance and society's ongoing effort to uncover the truth behind events that remain unexplained.